This week on Vice, the future of recreational drugs.
We're looking for new psychoactives. We're developing hundreds and hundreds of new drugs.
This is all industrial level synthesis.
Then, the reality of sex change surgery in Iran.
They have two gender norms, male and female. And if you are anything in between, you're sick and you have to fix yourself.
برادر من می‌خواست همچین تزی داشته باشه فکری می‌کرد بله اون روز می‌کشتم.
Currently inside a lab in Shanghai, China. This is the future of recreational drug use.
They basically find gay Iranians in Iran and help underground railroad them out of the country.
Bath salts have made some sensational and disturbing headlines over the last few years as one of the strangest and oftentimes dangerous drugs to hit the streets.
Police say 20-year-old Quinn Albers is responsible for killing 30-year-old Catherine Gick.
He purposefully abused bath salts and didn't remember anything leading up to Gick's death.
Now, bath salts are not actually salts that you put in your bath. They're just a nickname for one of a host of new synthetic drugs that are designed to skirt current narcotics laws. They're cheap, relatively easy to make, hard to track and trace, and extremely popular with young people. So Vice's Hamilton Morris took a closer look at this new frontier of recreational drugs.
Can I get the one with the strawberry and the one next to it?
18. This is Felipe and Wolf, two Brooklyn-based DJs who agreed to show us how easy it is to buy a new class of drugs called synthetic cannabinoids right here in New York. Which ones did you get?
You recommended this one. This is new, apparently. Oh, wow. Second generation. It's legal.
Good. So we have nothing to worry about. The new psychoactive substances flooding gas stations, corner stores, and the internet are one of the fastest growing drug markets in the world. The DEA estimates that the industry is now worth billions of dollars, with hundreds of different chemical compounds to serve any kind of high you're looking for. There are stimulants, sedatives, dissociatives, psychedelics, and cannabinoids, each with thousands of possible variations. Synthetic cannabinoids are the most popular drugs in America for high school students, surpassed only by marijuana, a drug their effect is supposed to mimic. Given the surge in new psychoactive substances, government authorities around the world have started paying much closer attention. We spoke with DEA representative Rusty Payne.
I think people don't realize, especially in this country, that there's a completely new frontier of drugs out there. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've identified over 300 new drugs, and many have been very much scrutinized by the government, and Congress has actually made them illegal.
Although hundreds of psychoactive drugs have been prohibited, manufacturers stay one step ahead of the law by tweaking a drug's molecular structure, creating a new compound that technically isn't illegal. In an effort to skirt regulations, the drugs are marked with a "not for human consumption" disclaimer and deceptively sold as incense, potpourri, or bath salts.
These are unregulated chemicals overseas, many of them. They're shipped in bulk over here, and they're distributed either retail or internet sites here in the US. Parents have no idea a lot of times that their child can go online and buy a psychoactive substance for pretty cheap and get it in the mail. What people haven't realized is how dangerous that is, because nobody really knows what's in these chemicals. It's something that is smoked or snorted, and it's potentially deadly. If you ask emergency room treatment facilities across the country, their numbers are up, and a lot of times they don't know what they're dealing with.
The synthetic cannabinoid market has been expanding globally for the last 5 years. In New York City alone, synthetic cannabinoid-associated emergency department visits rose 220% in the first 6 months of 2014.
ER doctors citywide say they are dealing with a huge spike in cases related to the abuse of synthetic marijuana.
Spring Hill Hospital alone is averaging up to 5 severe cases of this every day.
We just started seeing a mushrooming of calls.
Some drug baron that's making big money off people's addictions, of course he's going to be the one to tell you, oh yeah, I should be able to do this legally without any scrutiny. He doesn't care about these abusers of drugs, simply put.
But as we were about to find out, the modern synthetic drug industry began with the goal of actually making drug use safer. In the search to find out where these drugs come from and exactly how they're made, the trail led us to the other side of the planet, New Zealand. There we met up with what seemed like the world's least likely drug baron, Matt Bowden. Over the last 15 years, Bowden, a recovered methamphetamine addict, has created a veritable pharmaceutical empire from the sale and manufacture of new psychoactive drugs in New Zealand, allowing him to realize his wildest fantasies. A sprawling estate with private recording studio, steampunk fashion line, and a starring role in an intergalactic rock opera. So how did this eccentric musician become the godfather of a synthetic drug revolution? I asked him in his laboratory. This is the only lab of its kind in the world, I think. Can you give the entire story of how you got into this research? I'm trying to understand what's different about New Zealand, what allows this lab to exist.
What really got me involved in this area was we are an island in the middle of nowhere. The cocaine boat just doesn't stop here. And so methamphetamine was the drug of choice. And you do go quite crazy doing that. People losing their families, losing their businesses. And so we had to do something about it. In the late 90s, I started working with chemists and asking, would it be possible to look for a molecule which can substitute for methamphetamine in addicts, but has a far safer profile? And one of them was BZP. Right through the clubbing community, the drug of choice changed. Methamphetamine sort of went out and BZP came in.
Bowden's research suggested that BZP was less harmful to users than methamphetamine, so he set out to get the compound legalized as a safer alternative drug.
I rocked down to Wellington, where the Parliament is, asked who's writing the drug laws, and sat down and said, we need to change the laws around. So they said, okay, let's do some research. And it worked. So they said, okay, let's rewrite these drug laws. Very pragmatic and practical, and we just did it. We'd started packaging them into pills and making them available so you could buy them in nightclubs where people who were awake at 4 o'clock in the morning bouncing up and down like yo-yos.
Stargate International became one of the only pharmaceutical companies dedicated exclusively to creating new, legal, recreational drugs.
Over an 8.5-year period, about 26 million pills were consumed by 400,000 consumers, and there were no lasting injuries.
Bowden's success inspired less scrupulous manufacturers to release an array of competing products, creating a synthetic drug boom that didn't sit well with many New Zealanders.
Eventually we had 30 or 40 different brands of pills, and they were for sale right across the board in the corner stores next to where children buy lollies and ice blocks. Mummies and daddies saw that and thought, this isn't cool, we don't want our children exposed to these brands. So a lot of people sort of turned and said this is a bad idea. And the politicians, unable to convince the wider public that we were changing direction away from the war on drugs, decided to ban BZP pills. And as things started to be banned in New Zealand, they started to be banned everywhere else.
Bowden's company responded by manufacturing an unregulated derivative of MDMA called methylone.
So this pill here was our ecstasy replacement product, and it came in this little container. Looks more like an engagement ring box. So it's kind of like, would you like to have a very intense, emotional 3 to 4 hour relationship with me?
Soon methylone was prohibited as well, so Bowden moved on again. He built a state-of-the-art laboratory in order to stay ahead of the government by continuously developing new compounds.
So this lab was set up for our R&D. We're looking for new psychoactives. We're developing and designing hundreds and hundreds of new molecules and just looking for the best ones.
Bowden's business is now focused on synthetic cannabinoids, and he's trying to build safer variations of the same products that have been prohibited in the US. Some cannabinoids are an oil, and other cannabinoids are an incredibly pure white powder. And it shows how sophisticated the chemist working in Matt's lab is. But one problem is that not all labs share Bowden's level of sophistication and dedication to quality control.
If there's no motivation to develop safer drugs, then what's going to happen is that the cheapest, nastiest, strongest drugs are going to float to the surface. And anybody with a phone can Google the name of a molecule, order something like it from any of the hundreds of suppliers that are now around the planet, and have it shipped out to them. Those things can move around, they can't be stopped.
To get a first-hand look at the massive scope of production, we headed to China, the manufacturing hub for everything from iPhones to acne medication to synthetic cannabinoids. Using Bowden's long-standing relationships with Chinese labs, we were granted exclusive access to manufacturing facilities that are usually off-limits. I'm currently inside a lab in Shanghai, China, where synthetic cannabinoids are designed and produced on a mass scale. These 5 rotovaps could easily allow the lab to produce kilos or maybe even tons of a given chemical if they wanted to. This is equipment that they use to characterize the compounds that they're making. This room definitely contains at least $1 million worth of analytical equipment. This is all industrial level synthesis. This is something that I actually know very little about. It's one thing to make a couple grams of the chemical, but it's an entirely different thing to make metric tons in a lab like this.
Medicines are produced in bulk like this. The things are dried out here on the table, the solvents are evaporated off under lights, and cannabinoids and ecstasy and other drugs are produced in exactly the same manner.
This is the future of all recreational drug use. It's a cheaper, easier way to make drugs. This could easily represent millions of dollars of profit, both for this lab and for all the people down the line that sell it in smoking blends. It's certainly cheaper than growing cannabis plants. There's no question about that. And it's easier to ship. It doesn't have any odor. There are no drug-sniffing dogs that are trained to detect this material. To test how easy it is to buy kilogram quantities of ultra-potent synthetic cannabinoids, we went to another lab posing as potential customers. We were amazed by the sheer volume of synthetic cannabinoids stacked casually around the lab. Oh, wow. That's quite a bit. Considering that each dose may be a small fraction of a milligram, what I'm holding might amount to millions of hits. But this was just one order. Our representative then went on to show us other cannabinoid compounds that he's been making for overseas customers. Is the business growing or getting smaller? Growing. There's an idea that we should place blame on the Chinese manufacturers.
To them, it doesn't really matter. If someone says, can you put this carbon next to this carbon, they don't know if this is a glue to go inside the next part of Nike's shoe, or if this is some sort of a compound that's going to be used in a coloring agent and wallpaper. It's not really a concern for them.
Whether it was an amphetamine, psychedelic, or cannabinoid, they were eager to synthesize whatever compound I requested.
They can make it if we want.
Instead of saying, you know, these guys are bad, let's shut them down, let's lock them up, why don't we put some safety standards in place so that we know that at least what we are consuming is going to be safe enough, it's not going to hurt us. The only solution that I can see, and as we move forwards, is a regulatory system which rewards safer alternatives.
It's unclear which of these will be toxic until they're introduced into a large human population. It's like a giant clinical trial.
At the end of the day, you've got to realize that in the pharmaceutical industry, things are tested on animals. These things here are probably going to be tested by somebody's children.
And considering the size of the market, we're talking about an uncontrolled trial that spans the globe.
I've been told that there are about 160,000 chemical manufacturing companies in China. 160,000 is a lot. Those are just ones that we know of, and it makes the law enforcement challenge even greater. When we do research on a particular substance, there's always a new derivative or a new chemical compound similar to it that is being manufactured. I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're going to wrest our way out of the problem. We're not going to legislate our way out of this. You're talking about a completely different game. And for the government in the United States, it's become a game of whack-a-mole.
Ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when the Shah was overthrown, Iran has been ruled by fundamentalist Islamic law.
Iranian people are united and they believe, and all of them are behind Khomeini's leadership.
Today, women must wear head coverings in public, all alcohol is banned, and homosexuality is strictly forbidden.
In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country. We don't have that in our country.
Now, what's strange is that in the time since Iran banned homosexuality, it's actually become one of the world's capitals for sexual reassignment surgery. Now, to see if there's a connection between the two, we sent Thomas Morton to meet with Iranian refugees who fled this anti-gay policy.
Canada. Happy Pride, everyone.
Hi, it's Thomas. I'm in Toronto at the World Pride Parade. It's basically the gayest place on the planet right now. There's a guy running the show back there in blue shorts named Rasham. He runs an organization called the Iranian Railroad for Queer Refugees. They basically find gay Iranians in Iran and help underground railroad them out of the country. He brings them here to Canada, where they're basically free to be whoever they want.
How many people a year does the RQR help?
Since 2005, 885 cases. In average, we have 5 cases every month. I grew up in Iran as a heterosexual guy. I had to be a heterosexual guy. Homosexuality is punishable by death. Among all of the Muslim, clergy and, the justice system, the only difference and the only, argument is how we should kill them. If I go back to Iran, I will be executed. They believe that homosexuals are against God. So they interpreted that since you want to change this one, you want to change the God's rule, so you're against God, so you have to be killed.
One of the most recent Iranians that Arsham's group has helped find refuge in Toronto is Sohrab, who fled Iran with his boyfriend last year.
مثل بچه‌های دیگه نبودم، مثل پسرهای دیگه. پلیسای ایران اینجوریان که با نگاه به شما میفهمن که شما گی هستین و با خودشون میبرنتون. داستان من اینطوری بود که فهمیدن.
After government officials established that Sohrab was gay, he was sent to see a psychologist to see if there was any alternative to arrest and execution.
گفت که خب تو باید تغییر جنسیت بدی. گفتم من نمیخوام تغییر جنسیت بدم و در قالب یک زن با یک مرد باشم. انقدر ترسیده بودم که نمیدونستم باید چی کار کنم.
So what did you do?
پاسپورتمو تونستم بگیرم و با اولین بلیتی که برای آنکارا داشتم.
Sohrab joined the hundreds of other gay Iranians who flee to Turkey every year.
و خیلی ها هستن که همجنسگرا هستن، گی هستن، ولی به خاطر اینکه خودشون رو نشناختن تن به این عمل میدن و بعدش پشیمون میشن.
Despite the fact that being gay is a capital offense, transsexuality is completely off the books, which leads some Iranians who may otherwise identify as gay or lesbian to see being trans as their only legal option for coming out.
According to Iran's regime and Islamic ideology, they have 2 gender norms, male and female. And if you're anything in between, you're sick and you have to fix yourself.
Iranian doctors perform some 300 operations a year, putting Iran up there with Thailand and the Netherlands as one of the sex change capitals of the Eastern Hemisphere. But while getting a sex change is surprisingly easy in Iran, getting a visa as an American reporter, unsurprisingly, is not. So we sent a crew with international passports to film this improbable bastion of trans culture in the Muslim world. Farima is undergoing surgery today to transition from male to female. Up to now, she's had to hide her sexual identity from her family and neighbors.
دیگه یعنی اگه ماش بیهوشی رو دادیم، برش اول رو دادیم، دیگه داستان قابل برگشت نیست تقریبا. لباس الان بهت میدن، زودتر آماده شو که زودتر عمل رو شروع کنیم. خب دوباره هم یه بار دیگه تو اتاق عمل باهات صحبت میکنن.
Before a person like Farima can undergo this procedure, they're required to do up to 2 years of counseling, hormone therapy, and physical examinations to make sure they're actually transsexual. Once they've passed, they receive their official diagnosis from a government board who stamps a permit authorizing the operation. Dr. Kohanzad is a renowned surgeon who, despite taking part in Iran's booming sex change trade, is very particular about whom he will and will not operate on.
Finding the most suitable case to put on the table is the most complicated, part of this whole screening process. In this country, there is a lack of sufficient knowledge to differentiate between actual homosexualism and transsexualism, which is a major concern in the screening process. A vast majority of cases being classified and categorized as transsexuals are not true transsexuals. I can easily say that at least 25% of those coming at my office are asking for this injury because they are trying to facilitate, to get the accepted status in the society, to get a social acceptance in the eye of the law.
Iran's legal code is based on Islamic law. To clarify the Quran's distinction between homosexuality and transsexuality, we went to Qom, one of the Shiites' holiest cities, to speak with Mohammad Mehdi Karamaniya, a prominent Muslim scholar and hafiz, which is someone who's memorized the entirety of the Quran.
اما در مقابل در هموسکسوال ما می‌بینیم که دقیقاً کد داده شده. یعنی توی قرآن ما این کار ممنوع شده، یکی از گناهان کبیره و گناهان بزرگ شمرده شده. امام بحثی رو درباره تغییر جنسیت مطرح کردن. از نظر ایشون تغییر جنسیت مرد به زن و همینطور تغییر جنسیت زن به مرد حرام نیست. کما که رهبر فعلی ایران آیت الله خامنه‌ای هم اجازه دادن که این بیماران در صورتی که بیماریشون احراز شده باشه تغییر جنسیت بدن. در مورد ترانس چرا مجتهدین ما معتقدن که این کار جایزه؟ میگن که چون در قرآن و در روایات ما هیچ دلیل قانع کننده‌ای برای حرمت این مسئله بیان نشده و اصل جواز یا اباحه هست.
So, because it's not explicitly dealt with in the Quran, the proper Islamic stance on transsexuality is left up to clerical interpretation, which prior to the 1980s lumped it together with homosexuality as a form of perversion. Then Ayatollah Khomeini met a trans activist named Maryam Mokhara, had a change of heart, issued a fatwa, and all of a sudden it was legal to be trans in Iran. Amir Reza is one of the beneficiaries of Ayatollah Khomeini's pronouncement. Once a married woman, Amir has now legally transitioned into a man.
کاملا خواسته ها نیازام کاملا مردونه. هر چیزی که یک مرد از یه زندگی میخواد و من میخواستم، ولی وقتی به جسم خودم نگاه میکردم دقیقاً چیزی نبود که با روح من یکی باشه. کاملا در تضاد بود.
While the legal status of transgender Iranians like Amir Reza changed overnight, social acceptance has come a lot slower.
زمانی که داشتم عمل میکردم با بیمارستان اینا هماهنگ شده بود. خانواده من میگم تا این حد اذیت شدم. خانواده من با در حدی که پدرم به برادرم گفت امیررضا رو بکشید، من پشتوانه شما کل پول دیه شما رو اینو میدم، شما رو میارم بیرون.
کم کم دیگه مثلا خود پدرم جوری شد دیگه، مثلا اوایل به اون حرف و آتیشیش همش میگفت آقا الره بلره یا مثلا فلان این چیزا میگفت مثلا اینو بکشین، میکشم اجدام با ماشین اینو زیر بگیریم فلان. ولی خب به مرور زمان دیگه همه مثلا این موضوع رو اومدیم قبول کردیم.
Legalizing gender reassignment surgery may have made life better for trans men like Amir Reza, but has done nothing to improve the lot for Iran's gays.
هیچ کس نمیتونه تو ایران پیش خودش قبول داشته باشه که بتونه یه پسر با پسر این کارو بکنه. اصلا این جایز نیست تو این مملکت ما. بله اگر برادر من می‌خواست همچین تزی داشته باشه، فکری می‌کرد، بله اون روز می‌کشتمش.
Harsh as they may sound, especially coming from a trans man's brother, these threats are fully in keeping with the Quranic stance on homosexuality.
از یک طرف اصل حرمت رو بیان کردن که این کار مجاز نیست و دقیقاً تو خود این روایات ما اومده مجازات رو بیان کرده. داره یک دیدگاه فتوای بعضی از مراجع که میگن حداقل 100 ضربه شلاق و بعد همین فقیه میگه که اگر چنانچه ادامه بده و چند بار این عمل تکرار بشه و او دست از این کار زشتش بر نداره مجازاتش اعدامه.
While homosexuality ultimately carries the death penalty, there's no official records for how many Iranians are executed simply for being gay. Hussein Alizadeh, an Iranian expat who monitors Iran for the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, helped explain this lapse.
The Iranian government, they recognize the international pressure that exists around these issues and the sensitivity when there is a public execution of a gay man. So what they try to do is that they try to cover up, to always mix up the charges with something unrelated that seems so big that nobody can really protest to that.
This videotaped backroom trial from the 1980s is some of the only footage of Iranians openly accused of homosexuality.
در رابطه با کار قاچاق گرفتنش که این اربابشو به اصطلاح با اینا عمل زشت انجام میداده.
آره آقا این چیزا درسته؟ حرفایی که جناب تعیین دادن درست بود؟
خودت چی داری بگی؟
بله.
خودت چی داری بگی؟
چی بگم؟
چی بگی؟ چی باید انجام میداده یا نمیداده؟
نه تعریف کن. شاید زندگی دیگه تعریف کن.
از زندگی تعریف کن. از زندگی.
اومدم. چرا باید باشه؟ چرا میشه؟ اومدم اینجا بعد گرفته این کاری کرده.
2 hours after this footage was shot, both of these men were executed.
So, can you tell me what it's like being gay in Iran?
It really depends on your socioeconomic background. For people who come from a more comfortable upper middle class, background, obviously, it's very easy to conceal your real identity. And whenever things get heated up, you always have a way either to throw money at the problem or try to get out of the country. But for the majority of people, I would argue that's not the case. If you live in a very controlled environment, in a very closed society like Iran, the admission of homosexuality means that you disappointed your society, you failed your family. People don't know who they are, people get confused, and the government tries to block access to information intentionally and promotes that homophobia so that people feel cornered. And then all of a sudden, that surgery might seem something that they can work with.
For trans people like Farima, it's a wildly progressive move. But for gay Iranians trying to come to terms with their identity in an environment clouded by such enormous social pressure to conform, and where even basic sexual information is withheld by the government, it makes an already insanely difficult decision even harder.
It's not the solution, but a lot of people doesn't have another option. They believe it's choice, but it's not a choice.